Greetings and welcome to another edition of the Red Pill Diaries. I'm your host, Rashid. I'd like to thank each and every one of you for joining me today. Now, listen, remember I told you that Professor Kevin Barrett has a lot to do, and he had some issues that he had to take care of in his family. Hopefully, he will join us. I'm not sure. I told you guys on the last show, it'll be either today, tomorrow, or Monday when he'll join us. I just did not, I was only able to reschedule it for today, yesterday, okay? So please don't think hard of me. This is not clickbait. For those of you who have listened to the show on multiple occasions, you know it's not clickbait. You know that I tell you the truth. And hopefully he'll have time to join us on the most powerful platform, bar none, anywhere on YouTube or social media, the Red Pill Diaries. We are the most informative, most educational, and most empowering podcast out there, period, bar none. Now, let's get it. Until he joins, if he joins us, um, um, we'll be very happy to welcome him. If not, we're going to chop it up a little bit because there's a few things in the news. Now, we know that there was a big blast. We're going to cover a whole bunch of issues if Mr. Barrett does not join us at this moment. We have it open for, it's an open thing. He gave me the dates that he possibly could join us on the thing because of the family issue. It's either Tuesday, Wednesday, or Monday. Okay. So I don't want you all to be misinformed just to get views and stuff. I would rather just sit here and talk to myself than to lie to you all. Okay. And I don't want to lie to myself. So there's a few things that are going on. And I wanted to address a few things in the news, like we address on this platform. We are thought provoking. We make you think because so many people are lazy and they don't like to put that gray matter to work. So we like to make you think, and we give you a perspective that most people don't look at, or most people are not analyzing from. So we want you to analyze the entire picture. But I want to bring up a few things because this is very important. Recently, there was a massive bomb blast, right, that took place in Uganda, and it killed a lot of people, right? Now, remember, if you go back to previous shows from a few weeks ago, I told you to expect this. I told you to expect destabilization. I told you to expect the Western world to start telling their proxies to go do this and go do this. And I told you that these proxies were armed, funded, and ran by Western intelligence agencies, right? And they were just an arm of the Western intelligence agencies. Now I'm going to bring up some issues specifically, all right, in Africa. Then we're going to go to the Middle East, and it's not in this particular order. The Middle East and Europe and Asia and Latin America. It's not in a particular order, but we're going to address these issues, okay? Because it's very important. Now, I want to say something about Europe pertaining to Africa, pertaining to Latin America, pertaining to Eurasia, and pertaining to Asia proper. Because I think it is very important that we address the issues at hand. Now, as I said on one of the previous shows, that Mr. Borrell, the foreign minister of the garden, loves to talk about how European culture is under threat and how there must be some kind of architecture in place for European security. And I told you that it is Europe in the Western world that is making everybody else insecure with their policies of aggression, colonialism, and exceptionalism. We're going to address a few things concerning this. And we want for some of you to share this with Mr. Borrell. I know it won't do any good because you have arrogant pricks that continue to try to run the world, okay? Recently, in Uganda, there was a big bomb blast that killed a lot of people. In the neighboring countries, there were some blasts that killed people. Now, why is this important? Because remember, Uganda will not legalize gay marriage or the liberal way of thinking that everybody should conform to them, right? homo, and I don't have any hatred towards people that are gay. I had gay people in my family, but I don't condone homosexuality because I'm a God-fearing man. Okay, I don't have issue with the person, just with the acts. Okay, but as long as you're not in my face with it, okay, I don't think anything about it. But Uganda would not conform to the Western mode of things by accepting this into the culture. They passed a law which banned this, right? They also doubled down on their political, economic, and military partnership with Russia and trade with China. And they are also demanding that the U.S. removes those biolabs out of Uganda, right? So all of this is happening right now, within the span of the last few months. As a matter of fact, you heard a general even come out and say as much about they want to cement a relationship with the Russian Federation, and that they look forward to it. As a matter of fact, let's see something. Let me see something now right here. Let me pull this up while we're talking on this. Because I saw something earlier, right before the show started, that goes hand in hand with this. Okay, here it is. Here's an article right here. And I'm going to click on the article because I want you to see the connection with the bomb blast, okay, and with the influx of terrorism in Africa. This is not done isolated, right? Notice when people tee off the empire, will not conform to the Western way of thinking, the Western way of foolishness, and the Western way of everything that is God, they remove or they weaken it. They weaken your resistance to the word of God. They weaken your resistance to the order that God put in place, right? And then the propaganda machine goes into full drive, and then they'll have you believing that you're wrong, you're out of date, and that you are not knowledgeable enough in certain areas like that. That's what they do. They beat you down. They break your resistance to their madness. That's what they do. They break your resistance to the madness through the propaganda machines. Well, and then they'll say, you need to get with the times. Okay, this is how they do it. But this article right here from Uganda, it says, Uganda satisfied with military cooperation with Russia. President Museveni says, Uganda and Russia have historically maintained good diplomatic relations since the two countries established formal ties in 1962, just after Uganda gained independence from Britain. Over the years, the relationship has been defined by mutual respect and cooperation in various areas, such as trade. Listen to this very well. I'm reading this for the first time with you. I saw this right before we went on the air, roughly about a minute before we went on the air. Listen to this. Over the years, the relationship has been defined by mutual respect and cooperation in various areas, such as, what areas you talking about? Trade, defense, and education. He says, Uganda highly values its cooperation with Russia as well as with the former Soviet Union in the defense sphere. This is very important. Ugandan President Yoweri Museveni said during an interview with Russian media, today, we are very satisfied with our cooperation with the Russian Federation. We cooperate in the sphere of defense, and we buy high-quality weapons and technologies from Russia, Museveni told Russian media. We had a very good relationship with the Soviet Union, and now we have a very good relationship with Russia. What is very important about that? That he openly touted the trade cooperation, the defense cooperation, and the educational cooperation. This is a threat to the United States. The military-industrial complex want everybody on the U.S.'s time. They want everybody with U.S.'s weapons, because the U.S. weapons gives them leverage over the presidents and the defense ministries of other countries. And also, it gives them an economic leg up in trade over all rivals. Well, this is unacceptable for a former British colony to have close ties to Russia in such a way. And remember that the U.S. Embassy flew the gay flag in Uganda, not just weeks ago or days ago. No, I believe it was a week or two ago, because Uganda refuses to accept gay marriage. So now all of a sudden, in a span of a week, we have a major bombing, major destabilization going on. This is not by chance. This is on purpose. Now let's see something. I see someone in the chat. Let's see. Let's go. In the chat. But let's see. This thing is, YouTube is tripping again. Let me see. I got to go to the chat for a minute. All right. That's astral atmosphere. Yeah. He says, hit the like button, everybody. Hit the dislike button also if you don't like the platform, if you don't like the chat. He says, facts. The rainbow is God's covenant and promise to us, and bizarro world, Antichrist want to switch up stuff. Well, listen, they will do any and everything they can to break down the resistance to what's natural, to break down the resistance to God. Think about this. The Western world has become so arrogant, and most people don't think about this. The Western world has become so unhinged from reality and so arrogant and full of so much imperial hubris that they believe that they can do a better job than God. They believe that they know better than the creator and the originator of the heavens and the earth. They even challenge him on most things. In daily life, you don't even think about this. God gives you water. Oh, we got something better. We have something called smart water, right? God, or they're going to take the water and add what they want to it, and then they're going to tell you that it is better than the original life-giving water. These are people that have lost their mind. They want to be God, so they try to fashion and mold every government, every society, and every nation after them. That's why they are so enraged when people don't accept what they call democracy, when people don't accept their terms, when people don't accept their view and their way of death, because it's not a way of life, it's a way of death. Anybody with common sense would know that living the lifestyle of the Western world is a way of death. And they want to impose that way of death on every man, woman, child, and animal on the planet. They are even, listen, I read an article that they're even, in some areas of the country, they're even trying to decriminalize bestiality. They're trying to decriminalize bestiality. So in some people's eyes, it is okay for you to marry a dog. In some people's eyes, it's okay for you to marry a goat. Do you see the madness in this? I mean, but this is the Western world. Let's see the difference. Let me put this up here on the screen. This is by random. I'm butchering your name, so charge it to my head and not to my heart, okay? The difference. This is from Random Azurd. I guess that's what it is, and it says the difference between Soviet propaganda and U.S. propaganda is that Soviets had cojones to call it propaganda. That's a fact. That's, you know what? I didn't even think about that. That's a good one. I didn't even think about that. But anyone that is outside the scope of government control, Western government control, they're considered state-run outlets. Now, I want you to understand the significance of this, because we're talking about a lot of issues today, and hopefully Kevin can join us today. If not, he can join us tomorrow or Wednesday. Those are the 3 days. For those of you who are listening, those are the 3 days that he says he could possibly join us. He is dealing with a family matter. He's dealing with a family matter. Lord Freeze, what's up? He's dealing with a family matter. And so we have to be respectful and mindful of that. And I couldn't change the name of the show at the time anyhow. So I had to just get on. I didn't want to leave you guys hanging again. But with the mind state of the Western world, they will tell you this. Listen to me good. And I want you to understand for the algorithm, I'm not promoting hate. I'm not promoting sexism, culturalism, or any of those isms right now. The only ism that I'm promoting is factism, where I want to give factual analysis of things that take place. With the Western world, they will tell you that everybody is free to decide. Everybody has freedoms and rights. And then they impose upon you their thinking, their scope. As I said before, isn't it ironic that in the Western world, they often talk about multiculturalism, right? And the freedom to do this and do that. And yet they are the main opponents to free discourse, free thought, differences of opinions. They ban you, they shadow ban you, they do all this through all of these outlets. So that shows us that the freedom that they talk about is just a myth. It's just propaganda to make you believe that you live in a certain society when in reality you live in a fascist, dictatorial society. All right? If you don't believe, go against the grain on Ukraine. Go against the grain on Western involvement in Africa. Go against the grain on the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. Go against the grain with the U.S.-China conflict. Just go against the grain and see how well you do on these platforms and how well you do promoting yourself to other people. Just go. They tell us that we have the right to choose, and then they impose upon us their lifestyle. Listen to this, because I brought this point up, and not like this, because at the time I brought this point up in the conversation, I was more thorough in it because I had a lot of time talking. And I was talking about homosexuality, not denigrating the people, but letting my beliefs be known. Listen, if that's what you like, keep it over there. Don't force feed it on me. I'm not force feeding you anything. So they say, okay, but I have the right to do this. You may have that right, but you don't have the right to force it down my throat. You don't have the right to force it on my television or in my home. You don't have that right. And I'm not going to allow you to force it on me and my family. Well, I should be able to do X, Y, and Z. Well, do it in the privacy of your home. And then you get mad when you do it in public and you forcing it down other people's mouth. And they don't want to accept this. You understand? But in the Western world, up is down and down is up. They will tell you that this is the most Christianized nation in the world. And then they'll leave out how angry God was with that and how he destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah for such acts. Seriously. He was so wroth with the acts that not even a blade of grass grows in those areas to this very day. You understand? So you can't pick and choose. If you say you follow this, then follow it. But don't dismiss it to appease other people. That means that you're fake. That means that your whole premise is a charade, a facade. All right? Now, yeah. I see. I'm going to put this up in a second. It says, let's see right here. CC says, hi, mods and hi chat. So, shout out to CC. Lord Freeze, great podcast. Thank you, my brother. It says, matter of fact, let me put them on the screen real quick. I want to put their things on there. Okay. Let's see. This is the Amorites rulership, and she says, hi mods, hi chat. And Lord Freeze says, great podcast. We go back to we'll go to NRJ. NRJ says the Soviet people were like Americans who actually believe propaganda is real news. Yeah, they actually believe it. And you know how immature America has become? That if you have a different opinion, or if you don't side with them, they will threaten you. They will be angry with you. They'll try to discredit you. They don't know how to just say, okay, but I see that you think this way, and respect that and go and keep it pushing. They want to do everything to discredit you and force feed their view on you. How democratic is that? So, we'll get back in the chat in just a second, okay? I want to go back to this article, Uganda. So, we see the Ugandans dismissive of Western culture. They said they have their own distinct culture. And in their culture, that is not permissible or acceptable. And the masses stand with the president and the government on these issues. In America, being so contemptuous for the independent thought and policy of Uganda, went to such a length and flew the day that the law was passed in Uganda. They flew the gay pride flag over the U.S. Embassy. If that is not a sign of a deteriorating government, a deteriorating republic, and a deteriorating culture, tell me what is. You are so contemptuous that another nation has an independent thought, an independent culture, an independent needs from what you dictate, that you go and spit in their face. Right? I thought diplomatic missions are supposed to be respectful for the culture of the land that they are in while representing the nation of America. Isn't that what diplomatic missions are about? Diplomacy? Not trying to impose your view, your policies, your dictate, and your culture on another nation with a different culture, a different view, and different policies. Huh? The White House says, thank you, brother. Thank you for your knowledge, my brother. You are very welcome. And what it is, just common sense. To me, it's common sense. But common sense is not so common in today's world. And like I said, we have a sissified society that everybody gets offended about truth. But get offended by truth. I actually don't care if you get offended by truth. That means I'm doing something right if you get offended by the truth. And you're wrong. Right? So again, now as the Ugandan government submits its geopolitical ties with Russia and rejects the Western inclusive homosexual agenda, the United States, once again, out of the blue, with the British and with the NATO terrorist organization, causes a mass bombing. And I'm going to show you how psychotic it is. When they do these things, they do it and they hit nerves. They don't just target government officials. They go and kill children. They go and blow up schools, factories, old folks' homes, hospitals. They want to get the maximum effect of terror that they're inflicting upon the people. This is psychotic. This is psychotic. This shows you that the leaders of the world, especially in America, are sociopaths. They're psychotic. There's no, on the one hand, they say, cry for Ukraine, or Russia has been indicted. The president of the Russian Federation has been indicted by the ICC, which has no legitimacy, I might add, because Putin gave the order for the Russian armed forces to take Ukrainian children out of war zones so that they would not be killed. and move them to Russia proper to after the conflict, and then reunite them with family members or with their parents who were not killed. And yet you do covert operations that target children, that kill dozens of children and blow up schools. And that's fine, because that's advancing the Western agenda. You are flipping insane. You are. So the double standards, I continue to tell you that this is what the West does. Do as I say, but not as I do. Okay? So let's see. The devil's got their the devil's got their cojones. It's apparent. True. Now listen. All while this is taking place, do you know, as I told you, that the former colonial masters refused to leave Africa because they need the resources of Africa, because Europe has little to no resources? Remember I told you that? Remember I reiterated that? Remember I reinforced that? Remember I showed you that by Mr. Garden himself and what he said? Now we have confirmation that French troops were arrested. Listen to me good. All of this, you'll say, well, Rashid, you said these things when nobody was saying it. You called these things when nobody said anything on these matters. Of course, because it's common sense and because of people that I have contacts with. So it was reported yesterday by Eastern media outlets, but it actually happened a little bit before, a day before it was made known that French soldiers were apprehended on the Sudanese Chad border. The Sudanese Chad border. Listen to me good. They were illegal in Sudan and they were illegal in Chad, and yet they were operating in both nations. French soldiers. I think the pictures will start making their round on the internet soon, but I told you guys about this. I told you what they were doing. So listen what's happening. So there was intel drop, quote unquote, by Russia and China. This is not official, but there was an intel drop to the Chadian government, and the military of Chad reacted swiftly in Russian-supplied armored vehicles, and they were deployed to the border where they surrounded, listen to this, the Sudanese, what is it called? The Sudanese special forces or whatever like that. You know, the rebel bunch that the Sudanese army is fighting against. So the Malian military surrounded a group of them with a group of French soldiers on the Chad-Malian border. Not a peep of this is on MSNBC, CBS, NBC, Fox News, or any of that. Why? You know why? Because it points the finger to France and the United States and NATO by destabilizing the Sudan. Because remember that these nations like Sudan, like Mali, like Chad, Eritrea, Somalia, all of these nations are turning to Russia and China. And remember, it wasn't too long ago, and the Central African Republic. All of these nations are trying to boot out France, Great Britain, Canada, Germany, Italy, Spain, all of these former colonial nations. They're trying to boot them out. So the United States and NATO, as I told you, when they want to do it on the sly, they send one by one in there. That's the French. And then next thing you know, you hear something about the Germans. And then you'll hear something about the British. Then you'll hear something about the Spanish. Like this, they do it a little bit. But they do that as not to let you know that this is being put into place by the U.S. through its terror organization called NATO. Now, tell me, why were the French embedded along with the Sudanese so-called Special Defense Force. And why were they operating illegally in Sudan and in Chad? All one has to do is look at the destabilization that's going on in Sudan. And this is why the United States recently said that we may even intervene militarily in Sudan. Why? Because they do not want Russia to have a base in Sudan. I'm going to show you something. Give me a second. I'm going to show y'all what I'm saying. Let me pull something up. This is off the cuff now. Okay, give me 1 second. Let me try to find something real quick for you. Oh, don't think harsh of me. I like to inform you real good. And I like to show you better than just tell you. Let's see something real quick. Nations ordering let's see if I can find it real quick. Give me 1 second. I hope everybody can still see me, because now it says my computer is being hit by a massive virus. Oh, that doesn't surprise me. All right, here we go. Let's see. I'm trying to pull up a map for you all to show you the significance of what's going on. I pulled up one on my other show. All righty then. Ah, this is a beautiful. This right here. Let me see if I can pull out one with more. With more color, with more pop, so that you can understand exactly what is going on. Let's see. And I'm gonna put it on the screen as I pull it up for you, and then we'll discuss this. Bim. This should be one right here. This should be one. Let's see if I can pull this up here. All right. Let's see. Now, give me a second, everybody. I want you to see this, because this is very important for your understanding of what's transpiring over there right now. Okay. So let's see. Boop, 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 boop. Share screen. Share screen. Let's see. Here we are. Right, that should be it right there. Share the screen. It should be popping up in just a second. It should be coming up on our screen in just a second. All right. If you look to the map, to the far on your side, it's going to be it's backwards here. So on my side, it's the right. So it should be the left on your side. Oh, I don't know. I'm looking at it. It's like looking in the mirror to me. Now, I'm gonna show you some. You'll see the planet. The one I'm talking about has the Earth to the side. All right. Now, if you pay close attention to this, let me see if I can highlight this real quick. Maybe I can just go to this. Maybe this will pull it up. Hold on 1 second. Let me see if I can pull this up real quick. Let's see if it'll pull up like that. Maybe I have it right here. Let me go back and share the screen. Let me take this off. I removed that for a second because I pulled up a better picture. Give me a second. It's very important you see this map here. Share screen. Share screen. Djibouti. All right. Here we are. I put up this screen for you all. I hope it shows. I'm going to check out over here on my monitor over here and see if it pops up. Something is going on. I don't know. And remember, you see, if you look at the waterways, you'll see the Red Sea, you'll see the Gulf of Aden, and along that you'll see all of these other waterways, right? These are strategic waterways. Now, what's significant about this? If you look to my right, on where I'm pointing this way, but it may be looking this way for you. All right. If you look down, as you see the Gulf of Aden, you'll see the nation of Yemen right here. The United States, Great Britain, and Israel are illegally occupying the resource-rich and mineral-rich areas of that nation. They're also occupying one strategic island that belongs to the Yemeni nation right in the Gulf of Aden. Now, if we look at Somalia, the United States is over there occupying Somalia. The Brits are over there with them, and they're using drone strikes to kill people who are resistant to Western domination. In Ethiopia, the United States is stoking tension, and you can go Google this. The Ethiopian government has called them out on it. They've called not only the U.S. out on it, but they have called the UN out on it for what they're doing. Go Google this. Djibouti. What's significant about Djibouti? Djibouti lies right as you turn to go up towards the Red Sea. And what's significant about this? Because Western nations, at least 5 Western nations, I believe France is one of those Western nations, I know the United States is one, have military bases in Djibouti. And here's the kicker. China has a naval base 1 mile from the facility that the United States has in the nation of Djibouti. So it was very much needed by the United States to destabilize Yemen through one of its proxies, the House of Saud, so that the United States, Israel, and Great Britain could get a foothold into the Yemeni nation and control that strategic island right by the nation of Djibouti, because they would rather have more than one naval facility because China is right there. Now, if you go up a little bit, you see the nation of Sudan. We already know what's going on in the nation of Sudan, right? There is a civil war stoked by the United States because the Sudanese offered Russia a naval facility on the Red Sea. The Red Sea is where a lot of trade goes through until they go through the Suez Canal up into the Mediterranean. So the United States is losing her naval hegemony there. Therefore, you have an influx of terror, and you have the U.S., Great Britain, and all of NATO coming in there covertly to try to destabilize so that they can remain dominant in that area, because that is not only a resource-rich area, a minerally rich area that has huge amounts of tapped and untapped hydrocarbons and gold and silver and uranium and all of that stuff. But it has strategic land routes, airways, and water passages. Do you understand? Look up here. Look at the water passage. All right. Now, if you look over on the other side of Sudan, you see Chad, right? Chad is being destabilized because they kicked the French out. They wanted the French to leave. What does that remind you of? What the French did to the Central African Republic. The one medicine or manufacturing facility in CAR, the Central African Republic, was bombed by a NATO warplane. They dropped a NATO ordinance on the one and only manufacturing plant. I forgot what it produced. They dropped it on there and then they denied it. But after Russia and the Central African Republic officials did their investigation, they had 100% confirmation that it was a NATO ordinance dropped by a NATO warplane on the facility. That's not terror. That's not in violation of international law. Well, what about this so-called respect for territorial integrity that we keep hearing the Western world talk about and scream about in Ukraine? That goes out the window when it's in Africa, right? Remember, Joseph Borrell said he would make trips around Africa to secure resources for Europe, or what I like to call, as Joseph Borrell says, the garden, in his racist rant, right? Look at this map here. So me telling you one thing is something, but when you can see it along with what I'm telling you, it makes it more understandable. So I see you, astral atmosphere. Hold on. I'll answer you in just a second. So let me go back to this map. So we see destabilization in Ethiopia, Eritrea, Djibouti, Somalia, Yemen, Arabia, Sudan, even in Egypt. We see it in Libya. We see it in Mali. We see it in Chad and the Central African Republic. All of this area. Look, all of this area right here. We see this area right here. And it has the British, the French, the German, the Canadians, the Australians, the Americans, the Israelis, the Spanish, the Italians, the Swedes, and the Belgians written all over this. And all of them have troops in those areas. At some specific juncture on this map, each one of the nations that I said, plus a few more, have illegal outposts or have illegally deployed special forces to one area or another that I just pointed out. Where's the respect for national sovereignty, territorial integrity, and the rule of law that the United States continues to trumpet on television for everybody? The rule of law. Does it not apply to Africa too? Does it not apply to the Middle East? It only applies to the garden. If it only applies to the garden, then you should make that known and stop hiding behind all of this propaganda. You understand? Now, again, let's use a little reason. Let me take this off the screen for a second. All right. Now, let's use a little reason. Let's look at the situation at hand. Do you think there would be an outrage in France or an outrage in the UK or an outrage in the US or any of the other NATO terrorist organization members if the Malian troops were deployed to one of their nations covertly or overtly? Or the legitimate Sudanese military was deployed to one of those nations? This would be an outrage, right? And it would be called a declaration of war, right? And it will be followed by the invoking of Article 5 in NATO, right? An attack on one is an attack on all. Therefore, NATO must use military force. Why don't they think about other people like that? See, what I'm telling you is that there's a sense of entitlement and racism and fascism in every policy dictated by the West. They believe that they are the exception to the rules. They believe that they can disregard law. They can disregard God's word. They can disregard nature, the natural order of things. They can disregard national sovereignty and territorial integrity if it's what they want to do, because they have the bully pulpit of the media. So while they're trumpeting human rights and territorial integrity and national sovereignty, they are in violation of all of those things that they're trumpeting. They violate them in Latin America. They violate them in Africa. They violate them in Eurasia. They're violating them in Asia proper. And guess what? They're even violating them in Europe. Look what they're doing to Serbia. Look at how they have violated the territorial integrity of Serbia. Breaking off Montenegro, then Kosovo. This is not to mention the destruction of the entire nation of Yugoslavia, which these, I wouldn't say nations because I don't recognize Kosovo as an independent nation, but these territories were once a part of. No regards to international law, no regards to territorial integrity, no regard to national sovereignty, no regard to cultural differences, no regard to national independence or human rights or the security of the lives of the people that were bombed. They did it because they wanted to do it, and they wanted to advance an agenda to further push the empire eastward. The empire must continue. It's just like the debt situation. Most of you don't know. It's just like the debt situation. As Gregory Mandarino said, he says they must continue to expand the debt. They must continue to print debt. If they stop printing debt, boom goes the dynamite. This is the same thing with the American exceptionalism. This is the same thing with the American militarism. This is the same thing with NATO expansion. They have to do this, or boom goes the dynamite. When you say that you are the sole hyperpower, the sole superpower, and that you dictate to the world, you're the world policeman. This is unacceptable here. This is unacceptable there. This is unacceptable. When it's somebody else doing something that you don't like, it's unacceptable. But when you're doing unacceptable things that the majority of the planet Earth don't like, that's a piss in the wind. That's a piss in the wind. I am, and there is none other. You remember, and you remember in the Bible, and I'm very learned in multiple religions and stuff. Do you remember in the Bible, Satan wanted to ascend to heaven. He wanted to rule. He wanted a kingdom just like God, right? Right? He wanted that kingdom just like God. That's what he wanted. And he wanted to ascend to the skies. And he wanted to make everybody bow to him, right? He wanted the same glory of God. Because he wanted everybody to act like him, to be molded in his thoughts, in his image, in his likeness. Well, common sense tells us who is doing that on earth. And whoever is doing that on earth, and we know that they're not the God, then they have to be the antithesis to the God, right? If the God made and created the man in his image and in his likeness and molded and fashioned him, and then you have someone that comes by fitting the very actions that Satan had taken on himself. Well, we know that that person is not the God. So what does that person or that nation has to be? I'm just saying common sense. Common sense. A lot of people don't like to look in the mirror because sometimes you're looking back at an ugly reflection, right? So, again, let me answer this question because I overlooked it. I said I was going to answer that. Astral Atmosphere says, what Ugandan do in response to the bombing? I have no idea. But I know what I would do because the Ugandan military is not strong enough to repel the former colonial masters. And because the economy is not strong enough to withstand the economic bombardment of the Western world, because remember, along with this, America said that they were going to introduce sanctions because Uganda passed a sovereign law that applies to Uganda. It does not apply to America. It doesn't apply to any NATO nation. It doesn't apply to other African nations. It doesn't apply to any European nations or any Asian nations or any Latin American nations. It is a sovereign law for a sovereign nation and its sovereign people. And the United States says that they are going to introduce sanctions on a sovereign nation for passing a law that is the will of the people of that sovereign nation to not recognize homosexuality. So what is that doing? America is trying to force them into being an image and a likeness of America. That's Satan, right? Right? I'm not making this stuff up. Google everything I'm saying to you is at the drop of a button. Google it. Right? So, what should Uganda do? What would I do as the president of Uganda? Well, what I would do is immediately call for Russia to send in the Wagner Group. I would immediately ask the Russian Federation to send in the Wagner Group to help strengthen my security forces. I would ask the Chinese to send in their special forces because I would deem this as a national emergency. And I would have them helping to guard the strategic infrastructure and all dignitaries and their families while training my military and my special forces and my national police forces. All while that is underway, because you can't just look at it militarily. Politically, I would be making the rounds to my African brothers, to some sane leaders around the world, to my Asian brothers, to my Latin American brothers and sisters. When I say brothers, I'm meaning the sisters too. And to people like Serbia, and say, listen, let's conduct trade using right now the African payment system, and we'll connect it to the mirror system, and we'll connect it to the Chinese Union Pay system, and we'll connect it to the Latin American system that they're bringing on board, and we'll connect it to the West Asian payment system led by Iran. 11 nations in that Western, and the Eurasian Economic Union, and we'll connect it with the BRICS. Why? Because when the sanctions come against me, it will minimize the effect of Western sanctions, because I'll already have trade being done outside of the dollar, and I'll already have secured trade partners. And to get a influx of hard currency, I would invite the Chinese and the Russians in the end for a win-win deal to help me extract a lot of the mineral resources and untapped natural gas that I can then put on the market and sell to them at discounts, but also sell to the Western world at huge write-ups, while being supplied with the armament that is needed to not only rebuff any aggressiveness by the Western world, but to give them a bloody nose. I would make a deal with China to help empower me through giving me some of their systems. I wouldn't just rely on one. Give me some of your weapon systems. Show me how you made these weapon systems. Set up manufacturing plants in my country. Go to Russia, do the same thing. Go to Iran and do the same thing. Any independent nation that is under U.S. sanctions, I would be friends with. The enemy of my enemy is my friend. Right? And so at the same time that I would be insulating my domestic economy from Western sanctions, I would be also empowering my international trade with nations that are moving away from the dollar. And at the same time, strengthening my military hand by strengthening my military industrial complex, and also allowing us to learn more so that we can start producing our own weapons that we need. This is what I would do as a leader. I don't know what anybody else would do, but that's what I would do. Okay? And I would secure my borders. I would secure them. Right? Now, I hope that answered your question, astral atmosphere, but I think that's sound. I think that any leader, I think it's sound. Now, I want to go over to something. We know that in the news today, there was news saying Hunter Biden agrees to guilty plea to federal charges. That has made the rounds. I saw last night that they were saying that he was contemplating that. You know what that is? Remember when I was telling y'all yesterday about how the CIA started informing these newspapers about Ukraine's hand in the blast in Nord Stream, which we know it was the United States and everybody. Remember that? And remember I told you how everybody was thinking that this would be when all of the intel drops happened, they thought that this would be the thing to take down the Biden government, but in reality, it was a curveball that tried to exonerate them and tried to give them plausible deniability from terrorist acts that they are committing and that they have committed. Remember that from yesterday's show. This right here is like the 3-card Molly and the sleight of the hand. You know what the magician does, right? You know how the magician wows you and oohs you and ahs you, right? With the sleight of the hand, with the trick that he's doing, while he has your attention here, he's doing something here, right? This is what that is. Why now? Remember, ask the questions, why and why now? And who benefits? Because remember, Joe Biden announced that he would be standing to run for president again. This would be hanging over his head. The scandal with his son, right? And he know that he would be bludgeoned to death by this scandal. Now, It says the deal with prosecutors will see, listen to this, the deal with prosecutors will see the U.S. president's son avoid prison time. Okay, it says U.S. President Joe Biden's sons, Hunter Biden, will plead guilty to 2 federal tax misdemeanors, according to a Justice Department court filing in Delaware on Tuesday. Now, what this is a sleight of hand. It's to redirect your attention. Because if he pleads guilty to that, then in their eyes, you can't say that the Biden administration is biased towards the president's son. And it also redirects your attention away from the laptop with all of that mess on there. And it gives Biden an open hand to run for president again without this hanging over his head. And if he so won or lost, say for instance he lost, at the end of his tenure as president, he could quietly exonerate his son through a presidential pardon, clearing him of everything. So who benefits from this? Huh? Man, you got to get up earlier than that. Like I tell you all, I may have been born at night. It just wasn't last night, okay? I remember one time I said that on the show, and I went over to my mom's house. This is a sidebar. And we were talking, and we brought that up, and my mom said, hey, you were born at night. And it was just hilarious to me because I said I may have been born at night, not just last night. My mom said, you were born at night. So I was born at night, but it just was not last night, okay? And it says, Biden will also enter a probation agreement related to the purchase of a firearm while being a drug user. He is expected to appear in person in court for an arraignment at a future date. The deal, which follows months of discussions between federal prosecutors and Hunter Biden's legal team, will see him agree to probation on misdemeanor counts of failing to pay his 2017 and 2018 taxes on time. Now, you know, they put people in prison for that, right? And not only that, those misdemeanors are not really much, right? But that's what you have when you are connected. That's that privilege that is afforded to them. But it's also a massive redirection scheme so that the press cannot hammer Biden with this, with his son not being brought on charges and being brought up in court and all. You see, the negotiation took place for months. Why? Because they had to come up with a scheme that might be plausible and acceptable to the people if they pushed it on the people through the propaganda outlets. That's what that is. That's all that is. So again, Biden is trying to free himself to run for president again. Biden is trying to clear his son from the most egregious charges on those laptops, about those laptops. And so if the government doesn't charge him about that and it's swept up under the rug, then the narrative is, well, you can't say I'm biased. I'm the president and my son was brought up on charges. He's even on probation. He accepted a plea deal, right? See how good that sounds when you don't really know what's going on? Yeah, I thought so. Now, you never looked at it like that, did you? Did you? When that came out, you didn't know, you didn't even look at it like that. But we know how underhanded, how corrupt the system is. We know how cronyism works. And this man is afforded all types of privileges. You think about if there had been a black or Latino person on the laptop with all of those crimes and also with all those pictures showing him smoking crack and doing all of this stuff while doing other stuff. Man, they would have buried these people, and poor white people. They would have buried them under the jail. Okay? But when you're the president's son, when you're in the inner circle, when you're a part of the elite class, you get privileges like this, right? I know it. Now, what else? it was a few other things that I wanted to address too. I think they may have moved it. Let me see. Oh, here we are right here. It did move, but it moved down a page. Now, we've just heard a week ago that Germany, the economic engine and the heart of the European Union, economically and politically, has gone into recession. We have heard that unemployment is still growing in the European Union. Homelessness is growing, right? Inflation is growing. That's growing in the United States. It's growing in Great Britain. It's growing across the EU. And listen to this. If this is not contempt, you tell me what is. I'm going to click on the article. I'm just reading it with you for the first time too. But it caught my eye with this. It says EU is preparing $55 billion bailout for Kiev, Bloomberg reports. Now, what's significant about that? That could help cover the housing crisis that is underway across the European Union. Help people with rent, with mortgage, with heating, because Lord knows they need it. With the sanctions imposed upon Russia, you remember when Russia accounted for 40 to 45 or 50% of all European natural gas, that cheap gas, and now the prices are through the roof. This could have been a bailout that would have helped the average person offset some of those economic costs, right? But instead, the priority is to give $55 billion more to a criminal regime that is fighting a proxy war and losing on at every turn. They want to give them $55 billion more while the people of the European Union are suffering. You make that make sense. That's the same with the United States. While people are going into poverty, homelessness, hunger, mortgage, cannot pay rent. They have to choose between buying food and paying rent, or buying food and paying mortgage, or buying food and paying their car note, or buying food and paying for their medicine. The United States continues to come up with aid packages. They're about to introduce another multi-billion-dollar aid package to Ukraine. Where's all this money going? To the military-industrial complex. And the kickbacks go back to the very politicians who approved the bills. But listen, this stuff will come back to haunt them. All right? And I'm going to tell you why. It's for the same reason what I always bring up about the dumbing down of society. America and Europe, with these draconian laws that they're imposing upon the people, they think that this is to cement their foot in power. That's what they believe. But they don't take the time to realize that without proper education, you cannot have an enlightened, progressive, and forward-thinking society. Yeah, for a little while, you may enjoy the fruits of power, right? But what happens when society spins out of control morally, ethically, economically, politically, and socially? The leaders that brought that state to that nation will be enemy number one. Because when the people lose everything, as Gerald Celente says, they lose it. So you see them deconstructing society, not one brick at a time, by a wall at a time, one wall at a time. They're removing the walls on the house with these sanctions, with these aid packages, with ignoring the pleas and the cries of the average person. And they're helping to bring down the weight-bearing wall of their society. Because how can you advance as a viable society, as an enlightened and educated society without the proper education? If you dumb down the masses are your future leaders. Doctors, lawyers, police force, generals, scientists, astronomers, right? All architects. How far do you think a society will go when the future leaders are limited mentally? Huh? Well, you don't even have to hypothesize on that. Look at what's happening in America. Look at what's happening in the European Union. Look at what's happening in the UK. There's your answer right there. And it only snowballs from here. As I often say, this is not the beginning of the end of the Western world, as most people say. No, this is not the beginning of the end. This is the end of the beginning of the collapse. It will get way worse. And it will happen on scales unseen before. Think about this. For the last few centuries, the United States and all NATO and European countries have enjoyed unbridled power, unbridled influence, unbridled economic prosperity. Now, as these alternative payment systems and alternative currencies and alternative trade pacts by other nations that are outside of the West starts to take shape. Look at this. For America to extract the minerals and the resources that she has an abundance of, it takes a lot of money. Now, what if your money loses its value? How are you going to extract the resources? That's not viable. Europe has little to no resources. So as these alternative trade systems and payment systems and currencies take root and take shape outside of Western domination, how can the euro be maintained? Because remember, the dollar is maintained through the barrel of a gun. That means the British pound and the euro is also maintained through the barrel of a gun. Now, if you cannot fund your military escapades, you no longer have the barrel of the gun. And without the barrel of the gun, you no longer have the bully pulpit. And without the bully pulpit, you no longer exercise unrestrained influence. Now, without all of that, and you have little to no resources, and this system that they're putting together is a commodity-based system. What does that do to your money? What does that do to your military? And what does that do to your society, your currency, your economies? They go, right? All one has to do is see pre-development nations in Africa. Look back to before they started developing, right? Look at Libya before Muammar Gaddafi. According to the UN, it was the poorest country in the world at the time, one of the top 3 poorest countries in the world before Muammar Gaddafi took power. It had a literacy rate of roughly 2 to 3%. When Muammar Gaddafi took power, he invested in the people by using the hydrocarbons and the revenue from the hydrocarbons to build up his society, to enlighten his society. And a few months before he was deposed, I believe it was a month or 2 before he was deposed, the UN was going to give him an award for what he has done in Libya, raising the standard of living higher than any nation on the Mediterranean. This is very important to what I'm talking about with Europe, okay? Because Libya is on the Mediterranean, and so are most European countries. But the UN was going to give Muammar Gaddafi an award for raising the standard of life and living in Libya to the highest standard of any nation on the Mediterranean at that time. They were an advanced society. Now, let's not look at the bombing. Let's not look at the war for a second. Let's not look at the war crimes committed. Now, that the society no longer has what was afforded to them by the Jamahiriya government of Libya under the leadership of Muammar Gaddafi. Look at the state of it. The currency is no longer a desirable currency. Society has degraded and degenerated, right? You see warlords and gangs, right? Violence. Everybody blaming everybody else. Is that not right? On a daily basis. That's America and Europe's future. Because without the dollar, there's no pound. or euro, because this new system that is coming in is a commodity-based system. And yes, America has plenty of resources and commodities, but when the dollar drops, as it is dropping, it becomes more expensive to extract those resources, those commodities. And it becomes even higher to then refine those resources and those commodities, right? Which makes it almost impossible to use them to back the dollar, which means that as the oil and gas producing nations pivot to the yuan and the BRICS, boom goes the petrodollar, which means that the very foundation that the dollar as the international reserve currency stood on would be taken from up under its feet, which means that the dollar would lose more value, which means that there would be an influx of dollars coming back to the shores of America, right? And more trade will be exacted outside of the dollar, which would weaken the dollar further and weaken the pound, and by extension, the euro, because the euro has almost no resources backing it. So that means that now funding becomes impossible for all of these escapades. Funding becomes impossible to hold on to deploy your military to try to hold on to your former colonies. Funding becomes almost impossible to maintain your way of living, because now it may take 700 euros to purchase what 2 euros purchase. It may take $700 or $800 to purchase what $1 used to purchase, right? That's the future of America and Europe. That's what we're looking at. And so and these leaders know this, but they believe that they can beat mathematics. They believe that they can beat history. So they're doubling down on failed policy. Why? Because they have everything at stake. And they're trying to throw something, anything up against the wall to see if it'll stick. So in these escapades, and I know a lot of people get mad and they get angry and say, well, there are people in Europe that needs this money. There are people in America that needs this money. There are people in Great Britain that needs this money. Yeah, they do. But the leaders know that the Western world is going down, down, down. And what they're trying to do is stop the downward spiral for as long as they can. And so they become desperate. And in their desperation, they enact irrational, unsound, and desperate policies, which, if they would think through it, would cause more harm down the line. But they don't think it's right now. I call it the microwave generation, because they want it right now. They don't think about the consequences. Look at how China plans. They have 5-year plans, and they are wise enough to project 5 and 10 years down. And when they make a policy, they look at it from multiple angles and see what would be the least beneficial and what would be the most beneficial. And whatever they decide is the most beneficial, they enact that plan. But not with the West. Look at their irrational dealings in Ukraine. Look at how they are trying to destabilize Africa because they cannot get their way. They won't get their way. And when you have ruled Africa the way that Europe and America has ruled it, this is unacceptable for a former subject to discard anything that the former king tells them. You understand? The fall is inevitable. As a matter of fact, we're living in the fall. So let's read what she has to say. What's in this article a little bit. It says, Western taxpayers' money will be used to pay for Ukrainian pensions and the wages of government employees. Didn't I tell you guys that the other day? It is the U.S. and the EU that pays the salaries of the Ukrainian military, the Ukrainian intelligence services, the Ukrainian government, and retirees. Now, knowing that right there, do you believe the story that America and the West is telling you about America had nothing to do with the bombing of the bridge, with the bombing in Moscow, with the bombing of those naval facilities, with the bombing of those air bases, and with the bombing of Nord Stream. Do you believe that? Now listen, as I tell you, name a time when America has fully funded a government, fully controlled the government, and yet was not aware of what the government was doing, was not controlling what that government was doing, and allowed for the president and the leaders of that government to buck up against them. Tell me the time, show me the nation, show me the leader. And if you can't show me the leader, tell me the time, or show me the government or nation, it is because it didn't happen. Therefore, the logical conclusion tells us that the war that is being waged is America. As a matter of fact, let me tell you this also, as I'm talking to you all. Some more French soldiers, remember I told you about the French soldiers were captured? Now, and I gave you a little hint at the beginning, from an intelligence drop by a couple certain nations. They gave this intelligence drop to the Malian armed forces. And the French forces were caught with the Sudanese Defense Force. I guess that's what it's called. The rebel special forces of the Sudanese army. And they were apprehended by the Malian armed forces. Now, in Ukraine, in the Donbass area, this didn't make the news either, that more French soldiers were killed and apprehended, embedded with Ukrainian forces. A lot of them. As a matter of fact, I've seen the videos of them. So I know it's true. I've seen the videos of them. So, and the French is telling publicly, we need to talk to Russia. We need not escalate. And on the battlefield, you got French special forces, NATO special forces have been apprehended a day ago or 2 days ago in the Donbass. See, Russia doesn't tell everything like the West does, but they have been apprehended. As a matter of fact, there's a gathering of Western special forces in that region that Russia is wiping out right now. When they talked about Russia striking all of these formations, they didn't tell you that some of the formations were NATO formations. They like to say mercenaries. Those are NATO soldiers that were wiped out. So the escalation continues, but Russia is now escalating because Russia is now openly telling you that they're going to hit the command posts and the logistical centers and the training camps and the storage centers for weapons and armaments, right? And then you have Stoltenberg, the NATO prostitute, the Secretary General of the greatest terrorist organization known in the history of man, NATO, comes out and says, NATO weapons are drained. We're drained of weaponry. We don't have the sufficient amount of weapons that we need to. It is because Russia continues to deplete your stockpiles of weapons. Now, common sense tells you, okay, if we're losing on the battlefield and we cannot out-manufacture Russia, and they have proven to have more sophisticated and more advanced weaponry than us, and they have escalatory dominance, and our sanctions have not hurt Russia, only empowered and strengthened Russia while to our detriment. Common sense will tell us, man, this hole is deep. Let's stop digging and scream for a way out. Ask somebody to give us a hand out of the hole. But instead, they don't want to hand out the hole. They want somebody to drop them a bigger shovel so they can dig even deeper. Insane policies of the Western world. That's crazy, right? Man, I'm telling you, these people are they are hell-bent on exercising power at all costs. Those are what you call psychotic and sociopathic people. Go look at what the traits of a sociopath or someone that is psychotic. Look at the traits and tell me if Biden and his administration if the administration, Sunak and his administration, if Macron and his administration, if all of these leaders, Vanderlei and all of these other European leaders, do not fit the description of what a sociopath or someone that is psychotic is. Go look at the definition. You have a computer right at your hand. Google the meaning of sociopath, and then Google the meaning of someone who is psychotic. And then tell me whether or not these leaders of the Western world exhibit these characteristics. It's easy to do. So the article goes on and says, the European Union wants member states to cough up 50 billion euros, meaning $55 billion, to bankroll the Ukrainian government so it can pay wages and pensions and commence reconstruction projects, sources cited by Bloomberg have said. Now stop right there. The lunacy of that is reconstruction. So you're going to do reconstruction in a war zone so it can get blown up again. You reconstruct, these are kickbacks they're putting in these bills so that they can siphon off this of it is going to their military industrial complex of the West. And the elite get the kickbacks from this bill. Who in their right mind will invest $55 billion in reconstruction in a war zone that is being destroyed even more right now? Huh? Now, what sense does that make? That means that if you're doing that and these are your justifications for doing that, then there are ulterior motives. The military industrial complex is going to gobble up the majority and the rest will be disappeared as kickbacks to the people who instituted these laws. These people are trying, they're parasitic and they're preying on the very ignorance of the masses. And that's why they want you dumbed down. And they don't realize while dumbing you down and they're thinking that they're getting rich, they're actually destroying the weight-bearing load of their societies, right? And think about this. They are so arrogant, but yet so ignorant. They're so learned, yet so ignorant to the reality of what their policies are doing. Because think about this. Say, for instance, the military-industrial complex gobble up 40 billion of that. And 15 billion of it is left to split between the elite, right? What does that mean when your money is no longer worth anything? When these nations back away from the euro, back away from the dollar, back away from the pound, without any commodity backing. What does the 15 billion or the 55 billion means then? It means that you're just holding paper. You're just holding paper. Remember what I told you on a previous show about the greatest scam that was ever put across people? It's coming to an end. Remember I told you it was coming to an end? This is what I'm talking about. The European nations created the greatest scam known to man. They went around the world after being enlightened by the Moors. They went around the world and they set up trade with nations. They learned what the nations were doing. And what they did, they took it away from a coin-based trade and added paper currency. They put ink to paper and assigned it a denomination. Then they go to the nations and say, hey, I think those commodities are worth X amount of this currency. We'll give you X amount of this for your commodities. And when you want to do trade with us or buy something from us, all you have to do is take that and give it to us for what you want over here. Now, people say, well, you know what? That's a good idea. We can carry around paper currency because lugging around coinage is a problem because it's heavy. People got on board. And once that train started going real good, they started to introduce sanctions. Sanctions is not a new thing. All empires have executed sanctions in one form or another. And so when you get out of line with their policy directives or dictates, or you do something that they don't like or they don't deem that is acceptable to them, they sanction you nullifying the paper that you have. They print up, if they cannot get the paper from you out of the bank, they print up the exact amount and recycle that. Now you've lost your money. It's worthless. You can't do anything with it. But guess what they have? They have the commodities that they purchased with that money. And then they refine those commodities and they're willing to sell them back to you 10 times the amount that they sold them to you. But you can't buy them with the money that you have because they've made that null and void. That's a stick up without a gun. That's grand theft. That's what they've done. Man, that's a good scheme, isn't it? To defraud somebody out of their commodities. That's that 3-card Molly. Slide up the hand. And now with this $55 billion aid package, $55 billion aid package, think about the enormous pressure that it puts on the European Union's budget, right? And think about the enormous pressure that it puts on the euro, which in turn puts it on the pound, which in turn puts it on the what? The dollar. They continue to print ad nauseum, not thinking that it will eventually come back to haunt them. It's coming back, and they know this. Let's go a little further. It says, the terms of the proposed bailout are subject to change pending an official announcement on Tuesday. The outlet reported on Tuesday. The package will be financed, listen to this, by direct contributions from member states, meaning that they're fleecing not only their nation of origin, but the entire collective European Union. They're fleecing everybody. They're going to everybody. You're responsible for giving this amount. You're responsible. Hey, but you made this policy. This is what you want. You fund it. No, no, no. It's a directive by the EU. It says, the package will be financed by direct contributions from member states as opposed to borrowing from the market. So listen to this. They made that look good, didn't it? It will be funded directly by member states instead of by borrowing from the market. Meaning they're trying to make it seem like they're not printing up debt. Okay, but look, they're going to borrow from member states. Well, ask the question, where do the member states get their money? Where? It is printed by the European Union. So this is a funny way of bookkeeping, right? To make you think that they're not printing more money, but in reality, they're printing money, but they want it to be put on the back of member states, which is going to be put on the back of member states anyhow, because it's a part of the European Union. But this fancy lingo and all of this talk make it seem like they're not going to take it to the bond market and try to sell some debt. In reality, that's what they're doing. They don't respect you. I told you that. They don't respect you because there's no way that they can and talk to you like that. No way. Man, I'm telling you. Let me go to something real quick. Hold on. You guys bear with me. I'm going to look in the chat in just a minute, okay, and see what the comments are. All right? Now, let's see something. I want to go back to a clip I played. It's 2 minutes and 40 seconds. This is Mike Maloof because we're talking about the European Union. And we know that he was put together by the U.S. And we know that's the U.S. project. And we know that NATO, the military wing and the military industrial complex of Europe, is a byproduct and directly controlled by the United States and Great Britain. So when they talk about funding the military, they're lying. When they give you a number, remember that it's 2 or 3 times more. Listen to what Mike Maloof had to say about the U.S. defense budget. Just listen.
Now, this may come as a surprise or not to some of you. U.S. officials may be stretching the truth when it comes to the real cost of funding the country.
Are they going to play it? I guess they don't want it played.
Now, this may come as a surprise or not to some of you. U.S. officials may be stretching the truth when it comes to the real cost of funding the country's war machine. That is according to an American foreign policy think tank whose report concluded that the actual numbers are much higher than what makes it out for public consumption. According to the paper, the Pentagon's official top line for the 2024 budget was highlighted, that top figure, around $800 billion. However, the real cost of Washington's expenses for next year is said to be closer to $1.5 trillion. The report by the Responsible Statecraft Institute also alleges the Budget Control Act passed in 2011 gave rise to a slew of gimmicks aimed at escaping budget controls, including use of the term base budget, which includes only peacetime expenses. As for war-related costs, the Defense Department and Congress reportedly load tens of billions into a slush fund, which is then not reflected in the official numbers. Well, former senior security policy analyst in the Office of the U.S. Secretary of Defense, Michael Maloof, says that budget control loopholes in Washington are designed to favor the Defense Department.
The Overseas Contingency Fund is another hidden boondoggle for special operations, and it doesn't have to be reported to the Congress. And that in itself is tens of billions of dollars. Not to mention the fact that the Pentagon every quarter goes back for so-called supplements, and by the time it's all said and done, it's well over $1 trillion. And frankly, this is why procurement and the budget people have never been able to get their hands around what the actual costs are, or to delineate in any way to Congress how much is being spent. Let's say, for example, in Afghanistan, they don't want to tie their hands, and in many cases there are, as I say, waivers to implementation and even to deadlines. So while I'm not a budget expert, I've seen from the inside certain ways things are completed, how they're calculated, and how they try to end run the system. That they have these loopholes in order to ultimately give the departments, particularly the Defense Department, most especially the Defense Department, what it wants and when it wants it.
So, you see them funny money bookkeeping? The funny money bookkeeping, right? Now, why are they doing it? I want to read something in the same article that I was talking to you about. The one, let's see, what's the name of it again? EU preparing $55 billion bailout for Kiev, Bloomberg says. Now, down here, listen to what it says. I'm skipping a little bit because I want to go down to another point that goes hand in hand with Mike Maloof. The Ukrainian budget has been receiving cash injections from Western sponsors to keep it running. Remember what I told you? They are on total reliance on the West. So there's no way that they can act outside of Western dictates, and they rely totally on the West. Totally. It says, Washington and its allies have pledged to help Kiev for as long as it takes to defeat Russia, including through the provision of non-military support. The U.S. alone, listen to this, provided $26.4 billion in budgetary aid between January 2022 and February 2023, according to the Council on Foreign Relations think tank. The aid package announced by the U.S. Agency for International Development, or USAID, on February 24th was worth $9.9 billion. Now, this is not weapons. This is to run the government. Now, so if you add that, that's 35, that's 36.3, okay? Mike Maloof says you multiply it by 3 or 4 times, right? So we're going to just put it at an even number. Just an aid to run the government of Ukraine, within a year span, the United States has spent $100 billion or more, right? That could have helped alleviate poverty in America, $100 billion. That could have stopped foreclosures on homes that people are really catching hell trying to maintain. That could have stopped people from being thrown out in the street because they couldn't pay their rent. That could have fed the entirety of the homeless people in America and given them money. That's what. But if America looks at you, that's a handout. So they don't want to do it. The Democrats and the Republicans don't want to give out handouts. Yet they have no problem giving it out to a foreign territory, a foreign government, a foreign nation. That's not contempt. You don't think that's contempt? Huh? And the thing about it is NATO continues to get aggressive. And when we say NATO, we're really talking about America and the UK, because they really call the shots there. So when we're looking at NATO and the we're looking at the US and the UK trying to call shots. Now I want to make a prediction here, okay? Watch, it may not happen this year. It may not happen next year, but within the next 2.5 to 3 years, you're going to say Rashid was the only person that called this. France will tuck tail and run. France, I don't think, will be a part of the NATO alliance, because remember, they recently joined NATO just a few years ago. I don't think that they will maintain their position in NATO and as a so-called staunch ally of America, because they have their own motives and their own plans that they don't talk too much about. I said it first here. Now, it is becoming more and more aggressive. America continues to pour more and more money down the rabbit hole to get little to no results. Listen to this. I just want you to listen to this, because I want to play a couple news clips just for you to understand what's really going on.
While the U.S. insists it has no direct involvement in the Ukraine conflict, the Prime Minister of Georgia has blamed NATO expansionism for the situation, saying it triggered an escalation in the standoff.
I think everybody knows the reason.
I'm not sure I do. What do you think it is?
I think you know it well, and the audience knows it. One of the main reasons was NATO, right? NATO enlargement, right? And many other reasons.
You think that NATO enlargement provoked the war?
Well, I don't want to speculate, okay? And I don't want to quote the statements of the Russian government. But one of the reasons was Ukraine's will and determination to become a member of NATO. So therefore, we see the consequence.
Despite a long history of tensions with Russia over territorial disputes, the two countries recently resumed direct flights after a long pause and sealed a visa-free travel agreement. That provoked an angry response from the West, with the EU and US having already been critical of Tbilisi for not joining sanctions against Moscow. Ukraine, meanwhile, has lashed out at the comments of the Georgian PM.
It is very disappointing for Ukraine now to hear such messages. We are very sorry for Georgia, which is now in a situation where top government officials can make such statements.
We spoke to a former Georgian MP who says NATO acts in accordance with its own agenda, expanding its territory at the expense of global harmony.
Garibashvili was absolutely right, because we all know that the war in Ukraine, behind it was the desire of NATO to expand the territory at the expense of Ukraine. To be honest, the same thing happened in 2008 in Georgia. We all know that NATO expansion is unacceptable to Russia. That is, if the neighbors do not understand the depth of their neighbor's security system, then one should not expect other results from the neighbor, because neighbors should be treated with greater understanding. Georgia had shared security with Russia. The same thing happened with Ukraine. NATO's approach to Russia's borders, everyone knows all over the world that this was absolutely unacceptable for Russia. To move forward further and further, everyone understood how this would end. Interest in the war with Russia was naturally modeled by the West. Therefore, the Prime Minister spoke briefly, but to the point.
Now, what's significant about that video right there? Remember, in 2008, there was a war between Russia and Georgia that was stoked by Israel and NATO. Remember that? When the United States was training Georgia and was trying to do the same thing that they're doing now to Ukraine, trying to make Georgia become a member, force Georgia into becoming a member of NATO. And Russia told them that it was unacceptable. And so what America did was start training and start having war games with Saakashvili's government, right? And they implemented draconian laws in Georgia at the time, right? And then Saakashvili, on orders from the United States, after Israel had armed, and matter of fact, his security detail were Israelis. after he was armed by the United States and Israel and given the go-ahead, they shot up Russian peacekeepers in South Ossetia, right? And Russia responded by destroying the Georgian armed forces. And Russia was on its way to Tbilisi, which is the capital, and they stopped. And they inked out a deal where Georgia recognized that it was a security threat for Russia. Now, you had today's prime minister, the prime minister of Georgia today in 2023, and you have a parliament member openly telling you the reason for the conflict. He didn't say it was Russia's fault. Remember that Georgia was a part of the Soviet Union too. Matter of fact, some of the Soviet leaders were Georgian. So you have a Georgian MP and the Georgian prime minister openly telling you that it was the U.S. and NATO's fault because they have this unquenchable, insatiable thirst to expand NATO. Remember, I told you that just like the debt, NATO must expand also. They must continue because it's parasitic. It must latch on to host after host after host to keep the parasite alive. That's exactly what was said in different terminology, but that is essentially what was told. So the Western media omitted playing this. The Western media omitted mentioning this, but we didn't. And we're going to play another one. So I want you to pay close attention to this.
With Greece set to hold a second parliamentary election in June, following the last polls at the end of May, one party, the Democratic National Liberation Movement, or DKEA, is calling for an independent Greece, which decides its own national future in contrast to the EU states. DKEA party was established earlier this year in opposition to the current Greek government's course. Its stated goals are to strive for Greek unity and independence and an exit from the EU and NATO. It's also calling for resistance to Western hegemony, which, according to its leader, is destroying the country. The party founder and ex-Energy and Environment Minister, Panagiotis Lafazanis, says that Greece should reject Western influence and strive for closer ties with Russia.
The parties that will enter Parliament have approximately the same political position, especially these three parties, New Democracy, Syriza and Kinal, Movement of Change. Their political positions are almost identical. All three parties are products of the Western centres, Brussels, Berlin and Washington. They unquestioningly follow Western politics in a very subservient way. What the West says is the law for these parties. Greece has become a protectorate. Greece has passed into the hands of the oligarchy and its economy is literally sold out to transnational centres. And it's this Greece that matters because whichever of these parties forms the government, the political position will be the same. An equally reactionary, anti-people, anti-social and servile political position. First and foremost, our party, the Democratic National Liberation Movement, or DKEA for short, is against the protectorate status imposed on our country, against our country's dependence and its transformation into a kind of colony of Brussels, Berlin and Washington. We want an independent Greece, a Greece which will actually decide its own national and social future. For us, this is the main issue. The second issue that disguises us is our clear and precise position regarding the war in Ukraine. We say that Russia is right in this war. Russia did not cause this war. On the contrary, the war was waged by the United States, NATO and the Ukrainian Nazi regime. They caused this war, they are aggravating it, and they are leading Ukraine, Europe and the whole world into the abyss. Unfortunately, this unanimity that exists regarding the condemnation of Russia is literally destructive for Greece, for our region and, of course, for Europe and the whole world. This unanimity regarding Russia leads our country into even bigger dependence, carries even greater threats to our security and our survival, because Greece has now turned into a base for a big Western campaign against Russia. From the American bases located in Greece, troops and weapons systems are launched against Russia and are sent to Ukraine and neighbouring countries. For us, this is unacceptable. This puts Greece at great risk. We want Greece to be independent, to strive for very close, friendly cooperation with Russia, with which we have absolutely no disagreements. DKEA is the only party that says Russia is right. Russia is not the aggressor. Russia cannot be isolated. And vice versa, Russia should be helped in dialogue with Ukraine in order to find a fair, peaceful solution based on realistic positions. None of the mass media in Greece show our position. It does not give us the opportunity to speak to the Greek public. This shows that there is no democracy in Greece. On the contrary, there's a dictatorship, because democracy means that the voice that is different is also heard. NATO wants to escalate the war in Ukraine to an extreme form. I think that we are at the beginning of this war, its expansion and not the end of it. There is no benefit for Greece in supporting NATO in this war of aggression in Ukraine or in helping make this war more intense. Today, Russia is not at war with Ukraine, but at war with the entire West. For the first time in history, one country is opposed to almost everything, the so-called developed world. I'm talking about governments, of course, not people. Greece must say one big no to NATO, must say that it will not follow the sanctions imposed on Russia because they are illegal, unfair and unfavourable for our nation and our national path. Greece must stop sending weapons to Ukraine, which escalates the war, and all this needs to be done right now. This is our position, and it should be the position of Greece. Greece today can play a positive role in stopping the evil that's happening now in Ukraine. This should be the mission of our country, rather than being a colony and a pawn of NATO, America, Brussels, Germany, and of course, in this dirty war.
So, you get the gist of what's going on. The people understand that it is not Russia that's being aggressive. It is the United States above all. And then NATO, because NATO takes their marching orders from Washington, D.C. and from London, right? Brussels takes its marching orders from London and the U.S., Washington, D.C. Now, I want to go back to something before we close out. Remember when I was telling you about how this influx of terrorism has hit Africa, and I showed you the map of the nations that were hit and that are being destabilized by NATO nations, specifically and especially America and the French. Remember I was telling you that? And remember I brought up Uganda and this terrorist act that took place that killed these students and all of this stuff. And remember I told you about the strategic unity that Uganda has shown with Russia, and how Uganda is reaching towards China and Russia to pull itself out of colonial rule and to become a truly independent nation. While this was going on, let me put the words up to see what I Googled, because I want you to know exactly what I Googled. So I put in Ugandan general supports Russia. That's what I put in. Ugandan general supports Russia. And when I put that in, multiple articles came up, but one in particular from Africa News, and it says this. Listen to this. This is why America is destabilizing and lashing out at Uganda, right? Because Uganda has openly said that they have chosen sides, and the side that they have chosen is the Eastern Bloc side, and not to be a pawn or a slave of the U.S. and NATO. And all of a sudden you see the outbreak of Ebola, and these outbreaks take place right conveniently next to U.S. and UN biolabs in Uganda, right? So listen, this article comes up, and this is what it said. And we know the son of the Ugandan president, we know he was saying this, knowing that Uganda might not have the military capability for this, but he was saying this in a way to show his total support for Russia and the Eastern Bloc, okay? So when you hear this, hear it for that, okay? And this is what it said, and I'm reading it with you. It said that the name of it is Uganda will send soldiers to Moscow to defend Putin if needed. The president of Uganda, his son, said. Now check this out. It says, the son of Ugandan leader Yoweri Museveni, and his name is Muhoozi Kainerugaba, has said he would send Ugandan troops to defend Moscow in case of an imperialist threat. Call me Putinist if you want. We Uganda should send soldiers to defend Moscow if ever it was threatened by imperialists, he wrote on Twitter. The West is wasting its time with useless pro-Ukrainian propaganda. added the president's son, a staunch supporter of Vladimir Putin. And now you wonder why the terror is now reaching Uganda. You wonder why, right? That is in a nutshell. You cannot show the empire that you are against it. Now, with that in mind, let me play this clip right here before we close out, okay? I want you to pay close attention.
Ugandan students have been protesting against US President Joe Biden's threat to impose sanctions on the country if it introduces a controversial anti-LGBT law. The Ugandan government says the bill is aimed at protecting family values and the country's traditions and culture. Students held banners demanding that Ugandans themselves decide their own destiny without outside involvement. The US president says Washington will evaluate the new Ugandan bill and take action if necessary.
This shameful act is the latest development in an alarming trend of human rights abuses and corruption in Uganda. I've directed my National Security Council to evaluate the implications of this law on all aspects of US engagement with Uganda, and we're considering additional steps, including the application of sanctions and restriction of entry into the United States against anyone involved in serious human rights abuses or corruption.
Uganda is far from the only country whose internal affairs are under scrutiny from Western leaders. The French foreign minister last week said Syrian President Bashar Assad is the enemy of his own people. He should be put on trial, and attempted to justify that stance by claiming, quote, the battle against crime against impunity is part of French diplomacy. Well, on the issue of the West forcing its own values on independent nations, we welcome the thoughts of a guest panel.
It's kind of a clash of the interests. National interest from the people of Uganda, represented in the President Museveni and the head of the parliament, as I said in the report, because they're trying just to take care of the family and protect the family from what's so-called the new shapes of family according to the gender theories, and unfortunately, which is spread over the Western countries and the United States. And we hear, of course, what happened recently at the World Cup in Qatar. And it's a big mistake from the West, for example, because if I'm like a host and you are a guest, the guest cannot promulgate the codes of ethics to the host. Which is a kind of violating the international law and things like that.
There is no logic in the Western attitude towards third world countries. Any country that threatens their dominance of the world, any bloc that economically threatens the hegemony of the West and the US dollar, such as BRICS or any other Eurasian economic platforms, is being automatically attacked, threatened, and undermined by Washington and its allies.
And what do you think about the sanctions already imposed in Russia, in Iran, on China, on the other countries that they are not matching with their own hegemony, as my friend from Syria said before? Nothing, as if someone, shooting his own feet. This is unfortunately the stupidity and the racism of the West, because they're trying to impose their own dirty values on us.
When we talk about double standards, when we talk about hegemony, when we talk about impression, then you talk about those false values that the West has been preaching throughout the world verbally, but on the ground, it's completely the other way around. We have seen the politicization of the ICJ, the International Court of Justice. One day they want to bring President Putin to trial. Today they want to bring President Assad after Syria has been readmitted to the Arab League, and President Assad was the star of the 32nd summit in Jeddah a few days back. Now they want to bring him to justice. This is Macron, the French leader, whose own country has killed Colonel Gaddafi, occupied and divided Libya, partaken in the occupation of Iraq and the hanging of its leader, Saddam Hussein, whether you like him or not. These are two independent countries which were invaded by Western people, including France.
You see what I mean? See, everybody's starting to call it out. Everybody. But you don't get this in the Western press. You don't. Why isn't, I want to ask you something. Why aren't any of the other alternative channels speaking about this? Why aren't they telling you about this? Why aren't they showing you this? Huh? You have to start asking them these things and questioning them on this, because your time is valuable. That is the most precious commodity that anybody has, because it is an unrenewable resource. Once it is used up, you can never get your time back. So you must trade your time for something that is tangible, something that is just as valuable as your time. And that is knowledge, true knowledge. And if they will not talk and speak to the true issues, then you need to bid them a farewell. On that note, I'd like to thank you all for joining us on the most powerful platform for truth, bar none, anywhere on social media. This is the standard for truth and empowerment. This is your platform, the Red Pill Diaries. I want you to know that I thank you for your time. I'd like to thank you for your support. Please hit the like button or the dislike button. It doesn't matter. Just do something. Don't sit still. Do something. Hopefully for my channel members, I'll be able to start uploading more content for you in a few days if YouTube allows me to. The only hold up is YouTube. And so I just want to take the time out to acknowledge each and every one of you in the chat, especially my mods. You guys kick butt. Thank you all for being a part of this platform. You're just as big a part of this platform as I am. Thank you for everybody who watches. I love you if you love the truth, but know that the true and living God will always love you better. Until we next speak again, stay strong, stay true, but above all things, stay righteous. Hey, mama, your baby boy loves you more than life. I really, really do. Everybody, thank you. I love you. Deuces.